changing, and certainly when you look at the worlds of business intelligence and analytics, that is certainly true, and it's certainly not something that's happened overnight. It's been ongoing. Things have been changing for almost 30 years that I've been involved in this particular market segment, and we're going to address some of those during the course of the slides that I've prepared for you. So we actually, at Dresner Advisory Services, we're actually approaching our 10th anniversary. We focus on primary research for the industry. It's objective, independent research, and we actually publish a whole host of reports, some 15 reports during the year. So I'm going to share some of the trends from our what we call our flagship report, which is broad-based market research, and then some of our other more thematic research reports, such as advanced and predictive analytics and big data analytics. So let's start off with just looking at what's driving the marketplace, some of the overarching trends. And this comes from our flagship report. And our flagship report, this year will be our 8th year of publication of the flagship report. And if we could just move on to the next 2 slides.
Sure, Howard. I think I've successfully transferred presenter.
Oh, awesome. I'm in charge. Well, that's always a dangerous thing.
You are the driver now.
Thank you, sir. So user market drivers, just a few of the charts from our flagship report, just to kind of set the stage. Just looking at overall penetration, the numbers of users, and I just took 2 years here just to show you the trend in terms of the numbers of users that are accessing things like business intelligence and analytics that now have access to insight, to relevant and hopefully actionable insight than they did before. And there's been a real shift, even in the last 2 years, and it'd be even more pronounced if I went all the way back to 2010 and took a look at this, but you can see that on the far left, those are organizations saying they have under 10% of their potential users using business intelligence and analytic systems. And you can see the shift in just 1 year. You can see that the under 10% went down. The 11 to 20% went down. The 21 to 40 went down. All the categories went down except 61% and more all went up. So we're seeing far greater penetration, which is good because not only did I coin the term business intelligence, I coined another term that people have forgotten or maybe didn't realize, information democracy. At least I think I did. Maybe someone else used it. But back in 1993, I talked about this notion of information democracy, getting these timely, relevant insights into the hands of more people, more eyes on the facts that are driving the organization. So it seems like we're getting a little closer. Of course, it would have been great to have this done earlier, but we're clearly moving the needle and making progress. And if we look at expansion plans, it's pretty striking. Now we have 12, 24, and 36 months. The reality is 24 and 36 months is aspirational. 12 months, though, you could probably hang your hat on some of this. They may not achieve everything, but they certainly will achieve a good amount, and this is fairly bullish. This is pretty ambitious on the part of the organizations that respond to our surveys. And I should note that there are over 1,500 organizations around the world that participate in these things. So you can see that, once again, that under 10% penetration continues to go down, and then the 81% more, all of the higher categories continue to go up, which is very encouraging. And then one more slide around penetration, and I'm going to change gears a little bit. And this seems like a really obvious slide. But basically, if you look at those organizations that believe they've been successful with business intelligence and analytics tend to have the highest penetration. It seems obvious, but maybe not. I mean, I think the point that I want to make here is that if you are very successful with some of your earlier implementations of BI and analytics, you're much more likely to get the next opportunity. So really making sure that implementations are nurtured and supported and that the users have everything that they need to be successful is what gets you to the next opportunity and gets you closer to the notion of information democracy. So changing gears a little bit, I want to talk about targeted users. And this is actually from 2013 to 2016. So the blue bar is 2013, that lavender or purple bar is 2016. And what's been happening, which is also encouraging, really speaks to more people having access, is that executives have forever been the primary focus for BI and analytics. And that's not changed, right? That's still, more than 60% of the focus area for these organizations. But you can see that it's been shifting over time. It's been moving downward in the organization, which is really encouraging, down to individual contributors and professionals. They're still the minority, but this is still also encouraging, and also beyond the organization to customers and to suppliers. Once again, that's a great way to get people aligned with the strategy of the organization, or in the case of customers, to show your alignment with their strategy. And another way of looking at this is just taking a look at the change in targeted users from 2013. You can see the positives are at the top, individual contributors and professionals up. Granted, it's slight, but it is up. Customers up, suppliers up, line managers, middle managers, executives are down. So this is a real trend, and I think it is noteworthy that things are shifting. Things are shifting downward in the organization. We have more penetration than ever before. We're starting to achieve that notion of information democracy, which honestly 10 years ago seemed, even 5 years ago, seemed somewhat elusive. So real progress. That's the good news. The bad news is, and I preface the whole Chief Data and Chief Analytics Officer with this, is it's sort of like 1,000 flowers blooming, right? It's a little bit chaotic. You have users, everyone's bringing in their own data. They're using a lot of Excel to do what they're doing. It's amazing when you use Excel, you put some numbers in Excel and generate some charts, and it somehow gives them validity, even if the numbers themselves are not reliable or from unknown sources. So a lot of organizations, not as many as we'd like to see, but it's definitely improving, have established these two new roles in the organization, the Chief Data Officer and the Chief Analytics Officer. And so you can see, so we have two pie charts here, which basically show how many organizations within our research community actually have these two roles. And you can see, obviously, the greatest majority, some 86% or so for both, say that they don't have either one of these roles. The good news is we're about to start data collection again for 2017, and we're going to get to see how this has changed year over year. I anticipate, I'll predict, that we will see a gradual improvement. Maybe we'll even see this grow by 50%. We'll see, but we're pretty excited about that as we start our data collection, and we expect this to change for the positive. Where these roles do exist, where do they report into? The good news is the majority of them, or certainly the plurality, report into the CEO. And that's really important because the success of any sort of role like this, a very visible, a very important role, is very much dependent on, well, the organization, the structure of the organization, the reporting structure, the charter, the resources, the culture. I mean, so much gets loaded into whether or not this role will be successful. Now, you can see that the Chief Analytics Officer is more likely to report into the CEO, whereas the Chief Data Officer, yes, still more likely to report into the CEO, but almost as close is reporting structure into the CIO, which makes it somewhat more of a technical role. I personally believe, and we can discuss this later, that data is something that ought to be more important, or the realm of the business, right? Because ultimately they're the consumers of that data, and they ought to be taking a more active role. So I think having these roles reporting into the CEO is probably a worthwhile consideration. So let's change gears again and just talk a little bit about technology initiatives, and then we can go to the first Q&A. And we track a whole host of technologies, and we'll be expanding it again this year. So for 2016, we tracked 30 different technologies that are strategic to business intelligence. And so if you just look at the top, those are obviously the most popular ones. That's sort of the meat and potatoes of business intelligence and analytics. No surprise, reporting has not gone away. Nobody likes to talk about reporting, but by golly, it's still there. Dashboard, self-service, visualization, data discovery, data warehousing, all important. Then you have data mining and advanced algorithms and predictive, also important. But it's also interesting to look at sort of the bottom of the list and see what's actually changing, what's coming up from the bottom. So things like Internet of Things. Well, maybe that's not on everybody's horizon, but it is growing. Things like cognitive capabilities and machine learning, also growing. Big data. Now, that's almost in the middle of the pack. It's the bottom third, but we actually published our Big Data Analytics report late last year and saw a huge increase in the amount of adoption of big data and big data analytics. So it's always interesting I mean, these sorts of charts are really interesting to look at, and some people might take a more simplistic view and say, all right, well, these top 10 are the ones I need to focus on. Well, maybe, all right, but you also need to be cognizant of what's going on the bottom of this list, because those are the ones, many of them, in many cases, are the ones that are trending upwards. Not all of them. Some of them are descending. Some of them are ascending. So these are important to keep an eye on. And actually, in our report that we publish in May, we actually show you which ones are on the ascent versus the descent. So I'm going to pause that moment and hand it back to David.
Thank you, Howard. There's a lot of great information in there, and I want to encourage all the attendees. I think we have a record number of people listening in today. Please enter your questions in the Q&A box, and we will get to them. But I want to start with the first one. I'll be directed to Shawn Rogers. You know, Howard mentioned here that, you know, we're seeing an increase in the chief data officer and chief analytics officer. We see the usage patterns shift into more, the types of users using analytics within organizations. I'm just wondering, Shawn, is that something you're seeing as well? You know, we see it in the research, but, you know, you're out there talking to a lot of customers. What are you seeing?
I think it's a good question. I think, you know, Howard kind of zeroed in on it when he was reflecting on, you know, the thoughts that have come earlier from Howard in our industry around democratizing access. I think we always wanted to see this with BI, and we always thought that it was a hurdle that would be difficult to jump with advanced analytics or analytics in general. But I think that part is being addressed right now, and I find it very interesting that we finally have a C-level job title in enterprises that are reporting to the proper people in control of the company, and I think it shows an awful lot about how companies see data as a true business asset, something that has great value, whereas it used to be an IT challenge, it's becoming fuel for the business. And BI and analytics alike are both helping, you know, derive the value from it. So yeah, I do see enterprise customers trying to build a hierarchy that makes sense to them, and to, you know, I've always known, and Howard can probably confirm this, that no BI program or analytics program ever got off the ground without the right stakeholders. And now what you get with CDOs and CAOs in the organization is a built-in path to a stakeholder. And that doesn't mean every project gets green lit, but what it does mean is that there's a better structure within the organization to find a path for doing these things. And that also gives companies an opportunity to build centers of excellence and kind of bring together or aggregate their analytic and BI competencies. So, you know, Howard, do you see that as being part of the value proposition, the comment on the stakeholder and sponsor of these programs coming from the CAO and CDO ranks?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's why the organizational structure is critical. We've covered centers of excellence for a number of years, and they really need to be, and you know, very possibly a CAO or a CDO might own a center of excellence or might be part of the center of excellence. It's going to vary, and we're tracking that again this year and asking even more questions. But I do think that their charter is really important too, and who they're advocating for. If they're advocating for the end users, I think that they're much more likely to be successful. That said, the IT organization is an important part of this as well, and the most successful BI and analytics projects that I've seen out there, you have this alignment between the IT organization and the user organization, and sometimes that's facilitated by a COE or other program management types of offices. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes they do it of their own accord. But I can say reasonably comfortably that if you have a very successful project, the technical resources and the business resources are aligned and they're working closely together. It doesn't mean that that always works that way, but if they have been successful, you certainly will find that that's the case.
And that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and so I just one question that you know, you came in here, Howard and Shawn, is, you know, Howard, you made a distinction between, you know, who the chief data officer or chief analytics officer reports into. Is there an implication for what types of projects are done? You know, if you're reporting into a, you know, CEO versus a CFO versus a CIO, or does it really matter?
Well, it very much depends on the culture of the organization and what is considered valued. You know, I find that some IT organizations get ramped up in sort of technical implementations and don't have a broader purview of the business and may not have access or have the the prominence, if you will, in the organization to be able to partner effectively with the business organization. So a lot of it is culture. Some of it is just perspective on the organization. My personal opinion is that for a chief data officer or chief analytics officer reporting outside of IT, sometimes that gives you a little bit more access and a little more clout with those resources. Once again, it depends on the culture of the organization, the IT reporting structure. Depending on your organization, might be just fine. You know, once again, it does come down to each organization.
Okay, great, thanks. And so I think let's move on to the Internet of Things. We have a few more topics, and I want to make sure we cover them all. So let's move into the Internet of Things topic next. I think you have some research to share.
You bet. So we do publish an Internet of Things report every year, looking at really business intelligence and analytics in the context of the Internet of Things. And like I said, you have to look at the bottom of that long list that I presented earlier and look at some of those emerging types of categories of technologies and initiatives. And what's interesting to note here is that this one is its early days for the importance of the Internet of Things. It's some organizations are way ahead. Certainly more industrial types of organizations are way ahead. We also find, and I don't have a vertical breakout here, but you know, we find that telecommunications are pretty far ahead. Anything dealing with logistics and transportation, because they have to. It's the nature of their business. So having lots of those, you know, sensors out there collecting data, that's, you know, much more of a reality for some of those organizations than others. But the truth of the matter is the data is getting collected. Now, there are millions upon millions of sensors out there that are collecting data every day, and it's getting stored, and it's getting utilized, probably not in as coordinated a way as people would like, but it is, in fact, getting utilized. And, of course, we all carry a whole host of sensors around with us every day, most notably if you have a smartphone. That's a very prominent sensor. So you can see here that it's early days, really only about a little over 30% are saying that it's at least important. 48% saying not important. That is clearly going to change. Once again, you know, as we collect data, we see this gradual change year over year. If we look at it this by organization size, we can see that it's trending towards the largest of organizations. So, you know, certainly there's some degree of importance across all sizes of organizations, but certainly for the larger organizations, I think it's a greater reality if you look at this on a weighted mean basis, this is how it's currently sorted. And then I have another success with business intelligence slide here, and that's simply to say that those organizations that have been successful for business intelligence, that have done a good job with their projects, that have nailed some of the organizational issues and process issues, are much more focused and perhaps more well-prepared for IoT within their organizations. And likewise, I have another slide here which talks about the data, and data is really important. So this is our state of data chart, so importance of IoT by the state of data. And by state of data, it's really sort of a governance discussion, how organizations feel about their data. And on the far left, you have what we call data as truth. I mean, people really feel very strongly that they can trust their data, they can make decisions on their data, that it's consistent and reliable. It's the gospel, right? So organizations that feel that way about their data are much more likely, or somewhat more likely, to believe that IoT is critical or certainly important for them. So the data is really important. The success with things like business intelligence and analytics are really important. And to some degree, I think that's going to be a determinant for at least their readiness for IoT and perhaps their success with IoT. But it should be noted that IoT is not going away. There have been other initiatives over the years, and I know we've all observed these things. I know Shawn has as well, that sort of come and go. This one's not going. It's sticking around for a while because, once again, all that data is getting collected. It's going to get synthesized. It's going to get combined with other sources, and it will be used as a tool for organizations to be more effective. So one more slide on IoT, and this has to do with advanced and predictive. And when we publish our IoT report, what we talk about is those components that are necessary to be successful understanding and analyzing IoT data. And advanced and predictive analytics, is certainly necessary. Things like data prep, really important. Location intelligence, really important. So there are a number of components that are really important. But clearly, advanced and predictive is really important because you need to use advanced algorithms and advanced approaches to understand the volumes of data to find that needle in the haystack, because the noise to signal ratio when you're dealing with IoT data can be really, really large. And so using advanced techniques becomes really valuable as opposed to using more conventional technologies. So once again, back to you, David, for the Q&A portion.
All right, perfect. So, audience, just everybody on the line, please enter your questions in the Q&A box, and I'm sure Howard and Shawn would love to hear questions from you. While you're doing that, I'm going to open a poll question on the Internet of Things, so please look at the poll question in the panel on your screen, and the question is, does your organization have an IoT program? So I'm going to give everybody just a couple of minutes to answer that. And while they're answering that, the question maybe for Shawn Rogers is, there's a lot of differing opinions on IoT and big data, and I think there's some confusion out there. Are they related? Are they different? And, kind of general, how do people think about these things?
Well, I think that they're, from a terminology standpoint, they're a bit commingled. And Howard, I think, will agree with this, is that IoT as a data source, sensor-driven machine-type data, isn't actually a new thing at all. It's really been in the enterprise for a very long time. What's really kind of new or evolved is our ability to, get to the data, process the data, prepare the data, and bring it into our ecosystem in a meaningful way that allows us to leverage it and to get insight or to take action from it. And really, that's the end game for IoT, in my view. It's not just about, hey, look at that, there's some great new data sources. It's the idea of, can I differentiate my business? Can I be more competitive? Can I include sensor or machine data in my analysis to better, act and do things with my business? So I think that's probably the most important part, and I love the fact that Howard's included the importance of analytics in IoT, because I can't think of a reason to do IoT unless you're going to analyze the data and take meaningful action for your business, no matter what that ends up being. So, it's not a new thing, but it's part of that big data ecosystem. It's certainly some of the biggest data in a way that piles up in small pieces. If you've got a single sensor in an environment that's taking a reading 1 time a second all day long, it's like 85,000 rows of data. Now, it might not be very verbose data, very thick data, but it's signal data. And, analytics allow us to maybe listen to that data out at the edge and determine how important it's going to be and how much of it needs to come back to our core systems. And I'm sure Howard's got things to share on that, because there's a lot of methodologies being used around how to leverage IoT data right now. But certainly, David, it's part of the big data discussion.
Yeah, and I'll jump in there as well. Obviously, I agree violently with everything that you've just said. When you talk about things like edge computing, that's also very interesting. What's different about today versus 10 years ago is that we now have the ability to process all this data in a reasonable time frame. So some of it is, new architectures, new technology. Some of it is just the processing speeds that are now available, the communication speeds that are now available, being able to train algorithms against a vast set of data, and then use things like edge computing to send those things out closer to the source without having to come all the way back to a centralized system. It's pretty powerful stuff. So some of the things you can do are really important. Of course, I do agree the reason for IoT, maybe I'm biased, right, is you want to analyze all this data. This gets you closer to what's really going on in the world. It gives you perspective that heretofore was impossible to have. So I think that it's extremely exciting, but it does introduce new technologies, it introduces new architectures, and also new ways of thinking about the problems that we've historically been trying to solve.
Great, and I don't know if you can see the poll results, Howard and Shawn, but fairly interesting and I think consistent. There's a lot of interest in the IoT, but I think there's a fair number of people that are still waiting to kind of get going there. All right. See what questions we have. Okay, so we have a few questions here. There's a question on, let's see here. Is self-service really happening in organizations, or is it still IT-driven?
Well, this is Howard. I'll try and tackle that. It depends on how you define self-service. There are two definitions. There's an IT definition. Well, at least two definitions. There's an IT definition, and then there's a user definition. The user definition basically says, let me download my own tool, let me use my own data, and I may want to use corporate data, so IT ought to service me or serve me as sort of utility. But that's it, right? I don't want any sort of IT overreach trying to control what sort of technology I use or how I use that technology or what data I bring into it. The IT view of that is, how do we give users the wherewithal to access and to analyze, to visualize, to understand the data while injecting a lot of governance on top of that, controlling how they can access data and which data they can actually access. So two definitions. I think the challenge is, how do we bring those two things together? Because, yeah, we need to have some governance in the organization, but it can't be suffocating governance for the end users. And so there has to be a way to certify certain data sources. There has to be a way to ensure that we all use the same definitions for things, the same semantics for things. So there's, within the industry, even within those suppliers that have been focused on delivering end-user functionality and to some degree sidestepping IT, are also being forced to take a look at, okay, well, how do we govern this environment even if the users are driving it? So I think that, we're sort of coming full circle, right? The pendulum, if you will, maybe that's a better analogy, the pendulum is swinging back towards the center to the realization that self-service is really important, but we need to do it in a somewhat governed environment to make sure that we're all getting consistent answers to questions.
Howard, I'll jump on the end of that just to add one thing, that from my perspective, from an advanced analytics space, I think there is kind of, the old model used to be provider and consumer. There was always someone you went to get access, or a system you went to get access, and then you consumed. I think there is that new breed of self-service individual that kind of fits between there, that is, as Howard said, willing to drive their own tools, do their own work, and get their kind of aha moments or insight at a speed that better matches what they want. But I don't think the original model will ever completely disappear. I think there will always be providers. There will always be sort of enterprise implementations of insight systems, whether it's from an advanced analytics standpoint or a BI standpoint. In our side of it, citizen data scientists are this new breed that have emerged, and they're kind of that hybrid. They're part provider, part self-service, and so on. So I think we're seeing a new class of people interested in data, interested in the insights. But, Howard, your points about governance are really important, because as it becomes more open, it becomes more difficult for big companies to manage.
Okay, and I'm going to ask one more question on IoT. There's a lot of great questions out there, so audience, please continue to put those in. But this is more of a basic question is, can you provide an example of, business uses for IoT? And I think that's a very interesting question, because I think people are still trying to figure out where is the value, and I'm certain it certainly varies by industry, but I'd love to hear, Shawn, your thoughts, and Howard's as well.
Well, I can certainly go first. I mean, we see them in all kinds of industries. I'm sure Howard does as well. I think, the mainstay or sort of the foundation for IoT is really coming out of the manufacturing side of the world. So this side of our industry has always had this IoT data in their ecosystem, and as Howard and I both mentioned, it's always been difficult for them to get their hands on it and then to analyze it and bring it into their system. So now that hurdle is out of the way, I think the manufacturing space, we see an awful lot of traction, but we're seeing very innovative uses in healthcare and pharmaceutical and retail. So I don't think that there's any industry now where we can't find a couple of really high impact use cases for IoT data to be part of your ecosystem. So, there's plenty of use cases on our website that you can look at by industry. And Howard, I know that you encounter this as well. Do you see manufacturers as leaders, or is it, the exercise world? Is it the consumer space? What do you think is most important?
Yeah, well, certainly when you look at things like supply chain, that's a key area. But we see it in retail, very strong in retail. You see lots of beacons being hung up and all different sensors within stores, as well as them using your own phone And when you walk into, to a retail outlet, not all of them, of course, but the more forward-thinking ones, can actually track your radio signal. They want to understand where people are, where they're going within the store, what are they looking at, and then, of course, if they can close the loop, if you're part of their loyalty system and you log into their Wi-Fi, they can get a sense of, all right, not only where did you go within the store, but what did you buy? And that helps them do a better job of merchandising within the retail establishment. But there are other industrial applications. I mean, one of the ones that I think is really interesting is General Electric and what they do with their jet engines. They collect massive amounts of data about the performance of their jet engines, which is really important for things like predictive maintenance. So I do think it's broadly applicable, but sometimes it takes a while for people to get up to speed, to fully understand, and then to apply it to their own business in a way in which makes sense for them to start to leverage the technology and get real value.
All right, perfect. Okay, Howard, I think it's time to move on. Let's go dive into our next topic on predictive analytics and machine learning.
You bet. So we actually have a report on advanced predictive machine learning. Usually comes out in the August timeframe. So just to hear some of the things that from our last report, which came out last summer, we did add, so this just takes a look at who the users are for advanced and predictive analytics. And we, from 2015 to 2016, we did add citizen data scientist, which is sort of interesting. To Shawn's point, it did resonate pretty well with our respondents. Clearly they do better than third-party consultants or executives or marketing analysts, but you can see that statisticians are still the top dog. So statistician / traditional data scientist, followed by a business analyst and a BI expert. But the citizen data scientist definitely weighed in, and once again, we'll see how that changes over time. This is a really interesting slide, and we ask this question every year about who's actually using advanced and predictive analytics. And there's a tremendous amount of interest and energy surrounding advanced and predictive analytics, but not enough adoption. So you can see only 24% say, yeah, we use advanced and predictive analytics today. And then you've got 14% that are evaluating. You got 39% that might use it in the future. They might see the value or an application for it. Only 23% is saying we have no plans for it. But yet the challenge here, because of the value associated with advanced and predictive analytics, we certainly hope and we would expect to see that 24% grow, and those that are evaluating will be adopting. So we'll have to see how this changes in 2017 to see if we have more adoption and see if some of those people that are in the category of may use move into evaluation or adoption themselves. So it's one of those areas that is certainly urgent for organizations, but adoption has taken them longer, and sometimes that has to do with, I'd say more often than not, it would have to do with skills more than anything else. We take a look at some of the features of those that are using advanced and predictive analytics. Some of the features really have to do with basic predictive capabilities or categorization or clustering capabilities. Basically trying to, and this is fairly straightforward stuff. You get down to the bottom and you have things like neural network supported. So somewhat less interest in things like advanced algorithms, machine learning, and more of the traditional predictive capabilities are desired, forecasting capabilities are desired by organizations. So I'm going to transition now into big data, which is yet another report. As I mentioned earlier, we published that in the late fall of this year. And what's really striking is that the adoption of big data has changed quite a bit year over year. And as we were talking about with IoT, I should have mentioned that I view big data, or I view IoT as the reason for big data. It's a way of allowing us to understand that IoT data in a way in which we couldn't do before. So if we look at adoption of big data, here we see a very different trend. So 41% are saying they're using big data architectures. So we really define this as integration or leverage of the Hadoop ecosystem. 46% say we may use big data in the future. So the greatest majority are using it or expect to use it in the future. Only 14% say they're not using big data architectures for the analysis of that data. If we take a look at just the change in 1 year, it's pretty striking and really surprised our team quite a bit to see the adoption and how it shifted. So if you look at the blue bars, that's 2015, red bars are 2016. You can see the drop in the will adopt this year, will adopt next year, or I should say increase. So a lot more are saying they will adopt this year, a lot more are saying will adopt next year, and those that say will adopt beyond next year dropped substantially. So it's starting to become much more mainstream than we would have anticipated. It happened in a relatively short amount of time because we've been tracking this for a few years now. If we look at the use cases, this is kind of interesting, and I'll be interested to see next year if this changes, but data warehouse optimization is the #1 use case. And by data warehouse optimization, many times that means augmenting the data warehouse, or in some cases entirely replacing the data warehouse using something like Hadoop and a data lake approach as opposed to the more conventional approaches. And that's followed by using big data for things like customer and social analytics, clickstream analytics. And notice Internet of Things is at the bottom. I mean, there certainly is interest in it, but it's certainly not the top rated. Once again, that's going to change gradually over time as people become more educated, as they become more comfortable with some of these new architectures and changes and opportunities as they present themselves. And then I just presented this or built this radar chart simply because it's interesting to take a look at. If you look at who cares about the different use cases, it's notable to see that IT is focused predominantly on using big data as data warehouse optimization. Not a surprise. Most of the other functions are less interested in that. If you look at sales and marketing, they're much more interested in things like customer and social analytics. I mean, on par with data warehouse optimization, certainly, but you can see that some of these other things are more prominent, including things like, fraud detection being more important for, notice, sales and marketing, somewhat more important for the executive management. So different priorities definitely have for the different functions as it relates to big data. So once again, back to you, David.
Oh, thank you, Howard. Great insights there. And there's some great questions coming into the Q&A panel, so I continue to encourage everybody to please submit your questions there, and if we don't get to them today, we will try to answer them offline. But I want to start with this one, a very interesting question. What do you think is inhibiting the adoption of predictive analytics? Which weighs more, the data or the talent?
Well, I'll jump in real quickly, and I'm sure Shawn has a perspective on that. I think it's as much an education issue as it is a skills issue. And the technology, I think the technology has done its part. The technologies have become more intuitive, easier to use. Gosh, I've even had a degree of success using predictive analytics. I think that the technologies have done their part. I think it's education and skills. I don't think there are enough data scientists out there. Maybe the citizen data scientist with the appropriate skill level and training is the right answer and is the remedy to address some of the skills gap. But I think that the organization also needs to see the value in it, and that's something that starts with the most senior levels of management. Shawn, what do you think?
Yeah, you ended on, I think the comment that I was thinking of leading with, which is I think culture plays a role here. It really does. And I think the big significant shift that we've seen is that we're all getting used to, and we anticipate and expect a certain level of predictive and advanced analytics in our life. I mean, how many of you would be comfortable shopping at an e-commerce store online that doesn't recommend the pair of slacks that should go with your golf shirt, or doesn't remind you of what all of your friends may have purchased, or those types of insights are things that are becoming very much day-to-day for us. And so culturally, there is sort of an expectation of insight. And so I think that's helping knock down a lot of the walls. The question that David picked from the audience also asked, what's the bigger problem, data or talent? And I think that the data management aspect of it has matured quite a bit. And, and Howard kind of touched around that topic a little bit through his research, that there seems to be a maturity arc around the technologies that support the data. So now it's really whether or not we have the talent and the process to go out and leverage it. And that really put a lot of pressure on the vendor community in general over the last maybe 6 to 10 years. And I think that, I know from the viewpoint of Statistica, from our viewpoint, we have focused very heavily on making sure that we were democratizing our platform, because it was no longer for a standard traditional data scientist, although those folks will always be core to our success. we had to put feature sets into our platform to make sure that we had interfaces that made citizen data scientists and power users, business analysts much more comfortable utilizing the sophisticated math that they want to apply to data. So, it's a hard hurdle to jump over, but, to the question from the audience, it's a little bit of everything. But the good news is we're maturing rather quickly in this direction that, Howard mentioned, which is democratizing these insights, right? Making it more comfortable for everyone to digest. And I think, Howard, the other thing we see is it's not just someone sitting in front of a predictive analytics tool anymore. There's also this idea of embedding and threading it into other applications and into our daily decisioning, which is really where the culture meets the comfort zone.
Yeah, I would agree, and I'd add another comment there. I think that especially when you have data scientists, part of their job should be to do things like scoring, for instance, and take those scores and embed that into other applications where somebody might just be using some visualization tools. So you can actually leverage some of those deep insights from the advanced and predictive analytics more fully using more conventional technologies.
Okay. Here's another interesting question from the audience. This one is, when you show adoption of big data, does that mean all those companies will be using Hadoop, or are there other big data technology tools out there? I think is the essence of the question. So does big data equal Hadoop?
Well, when we talk about Hadoop, I talk about the broader Hadoop ecosystem. So it does include other technologies, but also there are other suppliers out there that have their own spin, whether it's a Cloudera or an Amazon. They have their own capabilities that surround Hadoop with their own functionality. So I do think that it's not just Hadoop. Just keeping track, by the way, of the various Apache projects surrounding Hadoop is a job in and of itself. And then there are third-party products that complement those things. But it's not just Hadoop. It's a broader ecosystem.
Okay, great. Here's another question. It was slightly related. It says IoT data tends to be structured. Why use a tool for unstructured data like Hadoop for structured data? Shawn?
Howard, do you want to go, or should I? To me, the data lake answer jumps to mind, and so I guess I'll say this up front, and we'll see what Howard's got to add to it. I think that there is a new shift in our strategies around data in general. When I got into this industry nearly 20 years ago, we spent a lot of time talking about moving data from its sources to central systems so that we had single versions of the truth and so that we could properly update and feed data warehouses. And so I think there's been a shift over the last few years. I feel strongly about it, that we're now allowing data to live on the platform that suits the data best. A lot of circumstances, just because of the volume of IoT data, many companies choose Hadoop or a data lake as a landing zone to refine that data later. There's an economic advantage sometimes, not always, but sometimes, and it's a good strategy for letting data rest where it needs to or be where it should be. This data warehouse is still very critical and important to our ecosystems, but it's probably a planet in the solar system. It's probably no longer the sun. And I think that also speaks to pressure for the vendors to be able to be agile enough to not only make sure that you can bring data back to source systems, but also or to the middle, but also to make sure that you can send analytics out to the edge, that you can put your analytics where they need to be, because sometimes moving the data is difficult. Data has massive gravity these days, and so sometimes it's best to put it where it belongs and leave it there and then use it as required. Howard, do you totally disagree with me? Or?
No, I don't disagree, and I'm not religious about particular architectures or particular data structures, except to the degree that they help us get the job done. And the advantage of something like Hadoop is that you can ingest extremely large amounts of data and then process it later. In fact, I did a case study with, I won't mention the organization's name, but what they had done is they had leveraged Hadoop from an operational perspective and collected these vast amounts of data and had a number of data scientists that had built a number of algorithms in that environment, but when they wanted to do the analysis, they extracted it and put it in SQL Server. So, I think that the promise of big data is that we can ingest and manage vast amounts of data in a distributed way and then we can extract that or distill it down to something that's really meaningful later on and use other architectures or technologies that may be more appropriate or maybe more natural for that organization.
Okay, great. And Howard, do we have, I think we're done with the slide piece, right?
We are.
Okay, if we maybe just jump to the on the horizon slide just to spark some neurons. We still have a lot of questions, and we're going to continue to take those for the remainder of the time. So here is one I thought was interesting, and Howard, this goes right back to your research. Is what do you think of the adoption gap between predictive, 24% adopting versus big data, 41% adopting? So I guess any commentary around that?
Well, I think that there's still a lot of hype surrounding big data, and sometimes, adopting, if you're adopting big data, that does not necessarily mean you're using it for analytics per se. You may be using it for operational purposes. But there's probably some spillover there where, people are talking about big data analytics as something perhaps that's, different than advanced and predictive analytics. So I think there's probably at a Venn diagram, we'd have some overlap in the middle there. But I also do believe that we have a confluence of events that are really driving us inevitably towards more advanced predictive and machine learning against larger and larger and more diverse data sets like we're getting from IoT. That's, I think that, there's some discontinuous change which is going on and which will go on as we get to what the next reality is going to be as we analyze data. But I think ultimately we end up in a better place, and it's a combination. If you look at the overall analytical diet of an organization, part of that has to be advanced predictive and machine learning with those varied and voluminous data sources. But we're still going to have lots of users out there that are going to want to do what they've done before, whether it's visualization, whether it's natural language analytics, or whether it's just good old-fashioned dashboards and reporting. That stuff's not going away. So, adding big data sources, adding advanced predictive and machine learning as part of that just gives us a more complete approach to business intelligence and analytics within an enterprise.
Great. Here's one, and Shawn, I don't know if you want to take a stab at this one. It says, how do we measure success of predictive analytics versus maybe more traditional reporting? Are those metrics different?
Well, I think, the two mediums, if you want to call it that, are very different things. It's instantly with advanced analytics, you tend to get a predictive view. With reporting, you tend to get a state of now and or historical view. So there's some inherent value in the fact that advanced analytics will often give us either deeper insight that we didn't have before or couldn't easily get from the data, which is certainly a differentiation against reporting. The other side of it, of course, is that even more sophisticated advanced analytics will often give us a predictive view. And certainly that's something that you don't get from reporting. But, quantifying ROI on advanced analytics investments in general is that it kind of delivers on that promise of big data and BI. We've made our investments in our data management. We've made investments in big data. For me, big data is not so much about the platforms, as Howard mentioned, but it's also, it's just about all the data. We're not restricted anymore. We don't have to ignore our IoT data. We don't have to ignore unstructured data. When I got into this business, we were ignoring 80% of the enterprise data. And so the big data revolution has allowed enterprise companies to include all of their data, basically, right? And even new data sources that come from the outside are being highly and fast integrated and adding even more value to what we do. So if you conquer the data management / big data side of it and you have your data in the right systems, BI and analytic platforms are the kind of answer to the ultimate payoff. And BI platforms do a nice job with the reporting and self-directed and self-service insights. And the advanced analytics industry is really pivoted to, I think, help a much wider group of people utilize all the data around them. But ROI is going to be different for every single use case. I've seen loss prevention ROI that's fantastic. But at the same time, I see sort of algorithmic economy ROIs where, I know we have a use case of a company that's in the mobile business, and they're in the mobile telephone business, and they wanted to enlarge the footprint of their company with their customers, and they actually used mobile data and advanced analytics to create a financial side of their business where they used mobile data usage patterns to determine risk models to decide who to make microloans to in emerging markets amongst their customer base. And it was very interesting. They went after a group of consumers that are widely referred to as the unbanked. These are consumers that either don't have enough money or don't live in areas where banking is something that's very normal to people, say, in North America. So if you can't look at or run a credit check on an individual, how in the world could you decide to give them a loan? This particular company utilized advanced analytics to build the models that enabled them to do that. So putting ROI in a use case like that is creating a whole new side of your multi-million-dollar business. The ROI on that particular instance is so massive it's hard to quantify. So, it's like any other technology-driven opportunity. You want to look at what it is you're trying to solve, how critical it is to your business, make sure the scope doesn't creep out of hand, and find ways to win smart and fast. And advanced analytics is now really agile enough to meet those criteria, and I think that that's what most companies are enjoying about this kind of change in the space right now.
Okay, great. And I think we're running close to the end of time, so I'm going to maybe have one more question here. And there's a lot of questions on tools, and I'll get to that in a minute. But this question really is around collaboration, and how much is the business and and technology experts within the company do you see more collaboration? And I think that's the net of the question. And any comments on the collaboration piece? Is technology helping collaboration more, or do you see a cultural shift that people want to collaborate more?
I'll handle that first and then see if, Shawn, if you want to pile on. But I think collaboration is critical. We've actually been covering collaborative technologies as it relates to business intelligence and analytics for almost 6 years now. And actually, last year we sort of reconstituted that research and added user governance as part of that. And we think it's critical. Of course, everyone is collaborating today, every day. Unfortunately, they end up using things like email to do it. And I think the problem with email is that it takes it out of context. So by leaving the analysis and the various objects, the analytical objects that we create, if we leave them in the environment, if we can collaborate on those things, stay in the environment and keep them in context, bring in scarce resources as need be, and also document the entire process along the way, I think it's wildly more efficient than the way that most organizations are doing it today by collaborating using email or using even face-to-face meetings. I think that having that collaborative component in your business intelligence and analytics environment is much more powerful. Shawn, what's your thought?
I think it goes back to there's a new culture, and part of that new culture is a new breed of kind of knowledge worker. This, I call them the Google generation. They have an expectation of having access to data, access to the right tools, and more importantly, and to your point, Howard, they expect to be able to collaborate. They live in a very collaborative world. So this kind of new breed of folks that are entering our workplaces right now, I think, are stretching our capabilities there. But I think ultimately I do see more collaboration because there is an expectation to be able to drive your business with data, with insight, with advanced analytics. It's become sort of commonplace. It's something that's expected that we'll be able to do. And so with that breaks down the walls there, and I think creates an experience where the business domain and the technology experts in the company are definitely collaborating and talking more. I think certainly, Howard, going back to your research about CDOs and CAOs, when you have those folks and you have centers of excellence, all of these kind of things start to coalesce around that. So you start to see that collaboration. The best COEs I've seen have a good mix of IT and business people involved in those projects, because ultimately that's where the success is derived from.
Okay, well, great. Thank you, Howard, and thank you, Shawn, for your insights. There are a lot of questions, and I will try to follow up with answers to some of these. We will post, the slides and replay this on the website, but there are a fair number of questions on, can you recommend a tool for this or tool for that? We have some of Howard's research is available on our website. He has much more research available. So if you're looking for tool recommendations, check out these reports here, or look at Howard's website, and he has several other reports that may help answer those questions on technology appropriate for the job. And with that, if you have any questions, we will make the slides available. Like I said, we will follow up with a recorded version of this. And if you have any questions, contact Howard, Shawn, or myself. So I want to end this, and thank you, Howard. Thank you, Shawn, and this has been a great webcast. So thank you all the attendees for your great questions. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.